Well, I'm sure well, you gotta count that during the same time. I was gonna say, since
you could sit down.
Sit on, yeah. I almost,
I'm doing post Dracula.
we were gonna cancel the Booker Bonsai panel, and I told Anthony, well, let's just do 84. And that was Booker Bonsai.
Yeah.
And just keep it going, you know, but he kept it.
I think you should.
It's a 40th anniversary.
So 40th anniversary means that you and I met 44 years ago.
And you're retired from the bookstore, right?
Yes. Yes.
Did you see that big ordeal they did?
Uh-huh.
I know an artist, a graphic novel artist. Him and his wife and daughter, they did it. And they got their stamps and or the whole thing and went through.
That's a lot of trade
What's
credit.
it? I'm drawing a blank on the name of this. That warehouse.
The cakes.
McKay's.
McKay's.
It's this giant, huge warehouse of used. Basically, it's all used, right?
Yeah.
And it's used DVDs, used Blu-rays, used books, and it's humongous. I could go in there and probably even get to drag me out. Yeah, go in there. And they have several stores, and they do this whole thing one day. You could, what was that? What, $800 or?
Yeah, if you went to all 5 stores and got your passport stamped, you got $800 in trade credit.
Wow, really? Yeah, she's back in there. She was like that last year. It's pretty scary. No, I mean, it's in a very exotic, or in a cool way. The eyes. Did you find John, or is he here?
No sign of it yet. We're still trying to hunt him down, but I feel like it's probably time to get started on that.
Okay.
Or formally, speaking.
Okay. You want to start us off? You're more experienced about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a little testing.
Yeah.
This panel is 1964, and we're here to talk about some pretty great movies that came out during that year. My name is Richard Shellback. Please call me Rich, and I'm a television writer and a print writer, and have been for some 40-some odd years.
I'm Ted Haycraft. I work at a TV station, NBC affiliate. I've been there since 1980. It's a little bit of everything in TV, but I currently do movie reviews on the air, and I used to write for some entertainment magazines, and hopefully a future book writer working on books right now. And just overall just film fanatic.
I'm Elaine's weapon. Yeah. And I just watch movies and stuff and post about what I watch on Facebook. And
We want, I think, Rich, I think you guys agree, we want this, everybody to be participatory. We can interject, interact. And more curious of what you think, if you've got a really great 1964 film that you really want to share with it, that's cool too.
Yeah, we're very informal here. We're not going to have a section where you ask questions or just ask them. Doesn't matter. I'm used to being interrupted. I've been married 35 years.
And Richard here, I contacted Richard and said, here's, you know, two of my big cinematic gods are Richard Lester, the Beatle movies, and Three Musketeers, and Sergio Leone, and we have an interesting angle on Leone in 1964 about this. But considering this is a fantasy science fiction horror mainly convention, Richard is going to kind of like lead us off. And I want you to lead us off and kind of guide us through some of the major ones that played that year that you think are considered really important or worthy.
Well, I think what I'm going to do is basically the full spectrum, because a lot of the movies that don't impress other people impress me.
Yes.
Because I saw them in the theater in '64, or I've been dying to watch it, and I finally got a copy of it, and I watch it obsessively for 2 weeks. but I think it was a good year for the entire spectrum. We had everything from Mr. Limpet in the fantasy movies to Horror Party Beach, which, as we all know, was the first monster musical, and its co-feature Curse of the Living Corpse, and but we also had Mask of the Red Death. I mean,
Oh yeah,
we had
that's a classic.
and a William Castle movie that I absolutely love because it's one of the more non-William Castle movies that he made, which was The Night Walker. There's not a lot of gimmick, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean that there's not a lot of gimmick in it. It doesn't remind one, at least to me, of William Castle, except possibly the music. The music reminds me of William Castle movies.
Didn't Castle have 2 out this year? 64th, the other, was it Stranger this year or no?
Yeah, I believe it was.
I'm trying to look at my list here.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, Straight Jacket. So Castle had 2 films.
So we had 2.
And of course, everybody talks about how he's counting a great Z, great B, Hitchcock. Hitchcock had one out too.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, some great stuff.
Which is Marnie. So depending on how you look at it, that was the beginning of the end for his career, or the end of the beginning of a really great run of his career. But it's always up to discussion.
Yeah, I've always, you know, this was a turbulent time in the United States and all over the world, but it was a very odd time for movies, and not just 64. I mean, it basically started in the 60s with Psycho, which was, you know, something that had really never been seen, and then the decade ended with Night of the Living Dead, thereabouts. So there was a lot, and I think 64 encompasses that.
You mentioned already animation and musical. I should just point out the #1 film, box office-wise, was Mary Poppins. And it had music, and it had animation.
It did.
Yeah, so, and that's good. I guess you could kind of say it's fantasy because she flies.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so we can count that.
Yeah, I think fantasy is probably the widest genre, because you can put everything in there. Like I said before, Mr. Limpet.
Yeah.
We also had kind of the new guard coming in with low-budget directors like Ray Dennis Steckler.
Can you name that title? Got it?
Incredibly Strange Creatures That Stop Living and Became Themselves.
Bingo, he wins the prize.
And what is that?
No.
Anyway, and a movie that eluded me for the longest time called Kiss Me Quick. And if you haven't seen it, it involves somebody from a distant planet that's coming down to Earth to get breeding stock. And he entices them with dancing sex robots.
And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the Frankenstein monster have something to do with
Frankenstein
this?
monster is in it and dancing.
Right. So we ought to say that, in 64, we're still, the monster craze is in full bloom.
Oh, absolutely.
It's still going on from the shock theater and the famous monsters film up in the late 50s, and it's just, things are going crazy in the horror genre in that way, with the models and toys and comics and everything.
The golden era of the toys and the models,
Right.
and
We're 2 years just ahead, and 2 years later, it's really going to explode with Batman 66 on TV.
Yep.
So.
And a fair amount of actors who had made their name in horror movies, like Vincent Price.
Oh, yeah, all the arch villains.
And the people who would show up coming out the
Windows,
windows as they were
cameos.
walking. I mean, you get people. Sinatra was in there, I think.
Yeah, I think Jerry Lewis Jerry did say when he was junior.
Yeah. There was also an interesting movie in '64 called Robinson Crusoe. Crusoe on Mars.
Which is
One of my favorites.
See,
It's a great movie.
Well, it has such a reputation, a Criterion snapped it up. It's on the Criterion list.
And Byron Haskins, who happened to be one of my favorite directors from The Outer Limits, but also is known for one or two classic movies, directed it. And it was the first time as a kid, because I can't remember how old I was, I figure I was 8.
I was 8 in 64.
Okay, well, there you go.
I was not going to theaters watching these movies.
Yeah, your parents were in control here.
See, that's the thing, my parents dropped me off. Absolutely
It
no
was 8
problem.
years later when I got to go to R-rated movies by myself.
Well, you know, the tie to that real quick, and we'll get
No,
back.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was born in November '58, so it's 14,
2 years younger.
Yeah, you're 2 years.
So my parents were in control, and they had a station like that. You had 2 younger sisters. They would throw us in the back and figured we'd all fall asleep, but I didn't fall asleep. And so I was seeing films that are way above my brain, age, and just absorbing it all in many ways. But yeah, it looks like several of you were probably seeing some films, maybe some of you are not. And of course, Elaine here is not even born yet, so. But go ahead,
No, I was saying it was the first time. Remember, everything strikes you a little bit odd as a kid. It was the first time I heard somebody say that they were going to have to drink their own urine because they were stuck on Mars. They had absolutely no liquid, and he was trying to figure out how he was going to filter that. And I thought, even at the time, besides the fact that I probably giggled a little bit, I thought it was incredibly deep that somebody thought about that, that it showed up in what was made as a kid's movie. But anyway, I wanted to touch on some of the darker stuff, including like Mask of the Red Death and things like that. And I appreciate the opportunity.
No, we can go back to this. I wanted to mention, I have a list of, I looked at this, it's kind of interesting, in '64, another thing that was in full bloom, and I'm getting off the fantasy part, but in foreign films in '64, almost all the major directors have a film out in '64. And if you guys are film fans, so everybody kind of general film fans, or are you guys just real genre fans?
Yeah.
General.
Yeah, 64.
Yeah. We got Jacques Denis, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. We got a Godard film. We got Antonioni doing Red Desert. Pasolini's doing The Gospel According to Matthew. I thought this was interesting. Guy in Cuba came out in '64 as a Russian director, and he ended up, his last film was The Red Tent later on with Rashad Connery film. That people didn't see. It was a multinational film. Truffaut's got one out, Soft Skin, which is very Hitchcockian. Carl Dreyer had one of you guys, if you're familiar with Carl Dreyer, he did Vampire. And he's got a real drama, slow cinema film called Gertrude. The great Indian director, I can't remember much of his name, Satyajit Ray, something like that.
I think Dreyer must have been like in his
Yes, way, yes.
70s or 80s.
Very old, yes.
Yeah,
Because Vampire was the half talkie, half, was a hybrid film. It's really
32.
Yeah, 32. And you got Ray from India, you got several Japanese directors, another Godard film, Jenner, what was the, we mentioned Qui-Gon. What's the story on that? It's a Criterion release.
Well, Qui-Gon, I found it interesting that it was unbelievably long, even in its original version, to the point where they cut out what ended up being the most famous story of the thing, which was the snow segment. But even then, even without that, it was still 120 minutes long, so it was very...
It's a horror anthology. Yeah.
Ghost story, yeah.
Yeah, and then there Oniaba. That's another fantasy, right? Horror.
Yes.
Yes.
Of course, the really fascinating thing about Qui-Gon was that it was based on the versions of Japanese ghost stories essentially that had been written by an American author, Lafcadio Hearn, but ended up being kind of incredibly influential in its own right. I mean, you can see shots that were lifted in whole cloth in that, in Bram Stoker's Dracula, in dozens and dozens of other movies. The entire third segment of Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, is basically the Woman of the Snowstorm.
And it's still a print on Criterion.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I discovered a version that's even longer than the one that was originally released.
So, yeah.
So we have the DVD and the Blu-ray, so it's long and very long.
Yeah, if you really want to, if you're into that, I would really, anything Criterion puts out,
It's like,
my dream
it's
is to
like
have all the
164 and I
Criterions.
think 185, something like that.
Wow. A couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and like I said, it's more, I don't know, it's not as centric to the convention, but it impacted everything, is one of my favorite, like I said, my favorite director. If people, someone, I can't really pick a number one film out. It's just, but the people find out you're a film enthusiast, they always ask you, what's your favorite film, what's your best film, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I can't answer that. But if I had, they put a gun to my head, and I really had to do it under pressure of death or whatever, I would probably say The Three and Four Musketeers, because I cheat a little because it should have been one film. And I said that film because it has everything I love in cinema and done so well. And the director of that is Richard Lester. Well, Richard Lester just happened in 1964 to be the director of A Hard Day's Night. So, and the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan in February, and then the film came out, and it changed everything. I mean, and it influenced it so much. And plus, that was a lot of a gateway for the French New Wave was through Hard Day's Night, because Lester was adopting jump cuts and crazy stuff. I mean, I remember as a little kid, I didn't see this in the theater. Did you see Hard Day's Night in the theater?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you were just like crazy. I mean, it was like.
Yeah,
It was
it was an experience. Well, first of all, I couldn't get the girls to stop screaming.
So you experienced it, really? The girls were screaming in the theater.
And,
Wow.
And it was, and I'm sitting there as a logical German child, or German ancestry, going, it's a scream, they're not really here. Trying to pay attention. No, it meant nothing.
Teenage girls
It
are
absolutely
teenage girls. They're
nothing.
doing it over Taylor Swift now. It's
Yeah.
never going to change.
Even on the movie, at the Taylor Swift movie showings, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Wait, have you seen Hard Day's Night?
I have seen it.
And what's your take on it? Do you like it still? Does it hold up for you?
I mean, I liked it, but I watched it when I was younger, like middle school, high school, and so I don't think I appreciated the art of it. And so Help became my favorite because Help is very bright and colorful.
Well, yeah. Well, my guilty, I would have to admit, Hard Day Night is the iconic classic, but I'm very partial to Help.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so loony, it's so silly, and you got it's kind of the bridge between the Goons and Monty Python.
It's
They're less
then what I remember of the two. And
Yeah.
I know I've seen both, but I don't even remember Help.
Yeah.
And Richard Lester, speaking of the Goons were a comedy group in the 50s. Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers, and Harry Sacombe. You might remember Harry Sacombe as in Oliver, the one that Oliver goes up and down for food. And Spike is just crazy. He went through Musketeers. Richard put him in there. But Peter Sellers, of course, we're going to talk about Peter Sellers in a few minutes too. But and then Richard Lester, he's an American, but he's working for English television. And English television was in its infancy at that time when Lester was there. So they give him jobs to do. And he does a show called, I think it's the Richard Lester Show or something. They gave him a show. And Peter Sellers calls him up out of the blue and says, either that was the worst show I've ever seen or it was brilliant. And he hooked up with Richard Lester. They did a short film called The Running, Jumping, Standing Still film, I think, or something like that. I mix it up.
I don't remember the title.
But it was a short, and then that led to Lester getting feature films done, and they tagged him. And then the Beatles were fans of that short. And they said, we'll have Richard Lester direct. They said, great, that's fantastic. And like I said, what was interesting about that was, you're watching this film as a kid. My first exposure was television for it. I was just just a little bit too young. And I don't think my dad was a Beatles fan back then.
Yeah.
I mentioned, well, that's long, that's for the panel. So I'm watching on television, and I was just amazed by the pacing and the cutting and John, but what was weird was John disappeared in the bathtub, and he's gone when they drain the water out. Or when they're in the train, and all of a sudden they're outside the train running, going, "Give us our ball back, mister." I'm like, you're trying to go, what? That's not reality. That's weird. And it was just, I think that was, again, advancing your movie knowledge as you're watching it and making you start to, advance, question things, advance things.
Things that people, that aren't quite linear or don't make perfect sense. The other thing was in the credits, George falls when he's running, and Ringo trips over him, and that's something they never leave in there.
Exactly.
And this was a deliberate thing that they left in. And they're both laughing hysterically as George gets up, and he just had a couple of superficial wounds and ripped his suit.
So Richard Lester, he's covered. He was like one of those kids that's in college when he's in high school age in America, and then he travels around Europe, and he ends up in the TV British industry. And in the Hard Day's Night, if you see his first one, it's Trad Dad or Ring-a-Ding Rhythm or whatever, I finally saw it. It's a musical. It's a really weird musical with some of the musical acts of the early '60s mixed into a really silly plot line. But the music scenes are cut so interesting.
Yeah.
You could see it foreshadowing Hard Day's Night. And then he did The Mouse on the Moon, which ironically, Peter Sellers got the job, or his connection to Peter Sellers. It's a sequel to a Peter Sellers film. Mm-hmm. Peter's not in the sequel. Ron Moody is, and some other interesting stuff. And that's kind of a quasi-science fiction film, because they're shooting a rocket up to this little country, if you've seen The Mouse on the Moon. But anyway, so Hard Day's Night. And then, so he's bringing in television, he's bringing in commercial making, he's bringing in French New Wave, and just all this, and just mixed together with the Beatles. And he saw that, what is going to let them be themselves, and it was just amazing. Then the problem was when they came up with like, okay, we got to do another one. What do we do?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's one thing I really wanted to bring up when I was told this panel. Another thing we can't ignore was a couple of interesting franchises that are in the house. 64 is when aliens would come down. I always said if an alien came down, show me the best film of this franchise. I'm burying the lead here. What film would you pick in the franchise to say this is the shining example? And I would say Goldfinger. Goldfinger came out in 64, and it's like blue. I mean, Dr. No is kind of the rough, low budget beginning. From Russia to Love is, more of a spy film, follows the book closely. But Goldfinger is where they start getting the blueprint of the almost wanted to break the fourth wall. He doesn't, the little gags when he comes out of the water with a seagull stuck to his head, and little things like that and pushing action and big action films. Just as far as it had been pushed at that point. Yeah. Like when he's attacked by a guy and he's kissing a girl, he sees the guy in the pupil of the girl's pupil in their eyeball and things like that. So what's interesting is in 64, Goldfinger is number 3. It's Mary Poppins, My Fair Lady, and Goldfinger. Mm-hmm. But guess what is number 5? Anybody can guess?
Dr. Strangelove?
You're close. It's close. It's in there, but not From Russia with Love. Because it got...
Oh, it was in re-release. Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah.
They did a second wave of push out to other theaters, writing the tales of Goldfinger's release.
And if you want to really do their homework, From Russia with Love, I think in some markets it was a 64 release, because I think the UK is like at the tail end of the year, and the UK got it first because it's it's an ancient British Secret Service, even though Saltzman and Broccoli were not British. I think Saltzman, I'm not sure which their nationalities are. Broccoli's an American, I think, because he used to work with Urban Allen, and then he left for it because Urban didn't want to do Bond.
He's American.
Yeah, so, so you got 60 Goldfinger, which of course is gonna affect the fantasy science fiction horror genre, and there's gonna be hybrids and crossovers and all kinds of stuff in the spy craze. So then the monster craze is in full bloom, and now Goldfinger, it's basically we're on the edge of just a full bloom of spy craze going on. So that spy craze going on, and then we get the Batman in '66. So you got all these just crazes going on, and they're all mingling and overlapping. It's just a crazy time. Then there's another interesting franchise, and they're both in the official '64 one is the second in the franchise, and it's the best, I think, but it's sometimes overlooked because it doesn't have a certain thing in the title, and it's called The Shot in the Dark. Yeah, and so Shot in the Dark is number 7, but Pink Panther was actually number 10 box office that year. So Pink Panther was still circulating so much, so that was pretty amazing if you think about it, because that was like Shot in the Dark was not supposed to be a spectacular. Go ahead.
I mean, also worth noting, Shot in the Dark was written by William Peter Blatty.
Yes. We're going to hear from him again later down the road.
That's going to come up in the discussion tomorrow morning.
Oh, there you go.
He managed to keep almost all of his Catholic horror upbringing out of the genre.
Yeah, Shot in the Dark was a stage play, and then he got Blatty did the screenplay, and then they were the Marsh Brothers had it, of course. The Marsh Brothers were a big giant production company putting out great A-film product at that time. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. The Magnificent Seven franchise, so they in Shot in the Dark they had this, and I don't see what's so amazing is we know how all this were sad. We know that a film takes months to get it done and pre-production. So I'm just curious how did they just go straight into Shot in the Dark from Pink Panther, or I think he was working on Pink Panther and they approached him, and then Peter said, yes, I want to do this. But then I don't know, if it was Peter's suggestions or it was Blake Edwards' suggestion or the Marsh Brothers would say, let's just make him Inspector Clouseau. And then because of the narrative and the story, it turns out to be so funny and so solid. Because Clouseau's just a supporting character really in the first film. It's really a David Niven, centered around David Niven and his nephew Robert Wagner playing in this thing. And Clouseau's on the trail of David Niven as the Phantom, who steals the Pink Panther Jim. The Pink Panther is not really a cartoon character, it's really a Jim. But that's another story for another panel, the Pink Panther. But anyway, but then Blake, so Shot in the Dark comes out, and he obviously did fantastic. But what's so funny, when the Pink Panther, I think, and you guys verify this or remember this, is that when the Pink Panther series started back up, Shot in the Dark was kind of forgotten because it didn't have Pink Panther in the title.
Just had nothing of Inspector Clouseau with
Yeah.
Alan Arkin.
Right. Oh, and Alan Arkin,
Yeah.
yes, less than about that.
Underrated, but
It's interesting, but yeah.
It's not a bad film, it just
Yeah.
doesn't have Peter Sellers.
It doesn't have
Therefore,
Peter
For those who don't know, the in-between, so Blake and Peter had a falling out. They did reconcile to do the party a little bit later, then they had another falling out or something. So the Pink Panther franchise doesn't officially really get back into full tilt in the 80s, or is it 90s? It's 80s.
80s.
With the return,
No, late 70s.
late 70s, Return to Pink Panther, and it comes in, and it's part of the whole sort of blockbuster era and stuff like that. But there's one little film in between with the Marsh Brothers go, we got this property, the first two are huge box office hits, let's do another Clouseau film. So Sellers and Blake said, no, we're not gonna do it, we can't get along right now. So they get,
Alan Arkin.
yeah, Alan Arkin, but I'm trying to get the director, is it not fully the Blake right now. Oh, Bud Yelcrin, I think it's Bud Yelcrin.
Yeah, it may have been. It was a thing that when I went back and finally watched the film, I do remember thinking, isn't that the guy who did Bullet?
No, Peter Yates.
Peter Yates did.
I don't think it's Peter, I think it's Bud
I
Yelcrin.
can't remember.
Somebody could
It was
Google it.
a name I didn't associate with comedy.
But it's got some interesting things. There's a nice thing. I bought the soundtrack because basically it had Jack Davis cover art. And I hadn't seen the movie yet, but it's Inspector Clouseau, it's Jack Davis artwork. And we're not talking about 64. I'm sorry, we're off track here. But and it had Frank Finley's in it. is the Inspector Dreyfus part. I don't know if he's called Dreyfus. Maybe he had a different
he's not.
name. And
But it's interesting that Alan Arkin is one of my favorites, but not in that movie.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it gave him an impossible gig.
yes,
But Shot in the Dark is actually closer to what we think of as a Pink Panther formula.
because you can tell us.
And, I mean, he's so much more bumbling in A Shot in the Dark than he is in the first movie. And the first movie, except that it deals with the actual Pink Panther, is probably one of the least Pink Panther
You're right.
of the series. But Shot in the Dark was the one that you could tell when it was on, at least in my house, because my father was bellowing. I mean,
It was your
That was bad. Or,
uncontrollable laughter.
yeah.
I
Well,
never-
I love, yeah, I would watch it every time it's on television, and what I was alluding to is, you also get it's Ground Zero they brought in. This is the first time we see Cato,
Yes.
and the first time we see Dreyfus, and his assistant Francois.
Yeah.
So they started establishing the whole supporting cast that we would go full blue in the bigger ones that came later, in the late 70s and 80s. So so we got some, so we got this interesting Bond franchise starting in 2 films in the top box office. We got the Pink Panther Shutter. There's another franchise, interesting, and it blew my mind as a kid. And who knows? Well, I know why I saw it, because in America we got it late.
Right.
But one reason Anthony put me on this panel, and I said, and I forgot why, and I said, why am I on this panel? And he said, he goes, don't overthink it, Ted. I go, oh, okay. One of my absolute cinema god is an Italian named Sergio Leone. And in
Don't say
1960
Sergio Leone. You don't need to qualify with the Italian.
yeah, exactly. And
No one's gonna think he's French.
yeah. And so in 1964, this little film comes out, and it's a Western made by Italians, shot in Spain, with an international cast and an American lead called Fistful of Dollars.
Oh, I thought you were saying Minnesota Clay.
This is why I thought he was actually like South American. I didn't think he was Italian. Sergio Leone, I mean.
Well, he's Bob Robinson
Depending on the print that you saw.
Yeah, he was actually, they changed Morricone's name, they changed Sergio's name. Morricone was the composer, and you can't have Sergio without Ennio in these films. So, yeah, I was so, but here, technically, the reason I'm able to justify it because it came out in '64 officially, even though we didn't see it in America until '67, and there's a reason why we didn't see it until 1967. There's a guy named Akira Kurosawa that was a little miffed about it, or his people were miffed about it, because basically Sergio was watching Yojimbo in the theater and goes, ooh, that'd be a cool Western. And actually, if we can believe that Clint Eastwood would think this, Clint saw it in a California theater, and he thought that would make a good Western. Little did he know he would get when he got the script sent to him eventually, after many people turning it down, he got the script and he goes, oh, this is Yojimbo. He recognized it right away. Problem is, Sergio and his folks never got the rights, or they never got it okay. And of course, the Magnificent Seven had already been a huge hit, and that was a remake of The Seven Samurai. So when they were shooting the film, they wanted to call it, the original title was The Magnificent Stranger. And Clint thought that was the title when he left to go back to America and keep doing Rawhide. He was still doing a couple more seasons of Rawhide. And he was waiting to see, he goes, well, if this thing bombs and doesn't do anything, I'm okay. But if it does, that's great. I got a free trip to Italy. And when he met, of course, when he met Sergio, he goes, there's something to this guy. He can hardly speak English. But
Better late than never.
My apologies. Coming from Charlotte, traffic was a lot worse. I had down here. I'm so sorry I'll be interrupted.
well, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second. We're talking about Fistful of Dollars, because it technically got released in '64, and that's one.
Oh, okay.
So, So Kurosawa and his folks somehow he got out because he became a huge moneymaker in Italy. And I don't know how many more countries it played in '64, but it's starting to play in some neighboring European countries too. And he gets a letter from Toho Studios saying, you know, we got a problem here. And Sergio goes, I got a letter from the master. He was so excited. It was with Kurosawa. He was just, you know, Kurosawa was acknowledging him, you know, Sergio says it's not a good letter. So they had to basically give up the rights of money in box office in the Asian markets for that. And I'd also do a really trivia side note. I'm going to bore you with, sorry, because I can talk about the whole hour on this on the Delony films. I remember buying, they came out with paperback books, $2 more get me out, and even newer stories of The Man with No Name. That was a United Artists marketing thing. It was not, Sergio had never, you know, he gets called by certain names in all three of the films and actually watched the films. But there was they commissioned to get that the ugly with United Artists money, and they bought Fistful of $2 more. But part of the problem was holding up as the Toho studio problem. They were kind of scared that, we're going to get in trouble for releases. And then they got the other two, and they said, well, let's just make the Bond films are doing well, we have the two Pink Panthers, you know, so let's make this another franchise, and market it as a franchise. So therefore, The Man with No Name. Some people call it the Dollars Trilogy, that's another name that got attached to it. So anyway, what was I going to say about Clinton, you know, was making money until he
because he thought it was still under the old name.
Old name. He gets a call from reporters. He started getting calls from reporters and saying, "Hey, what do you think about your movie doing so well?" And he had seen the article, but he didn't know what that was making. There was articles that this Western in Italy was doing well, but I don't think he still even realized that article was pertaining to his. And then, of course, the rest is history. And you know, and here he is in his early 90s. He's still directing. It's just an amazing storyline on his career. So, but people that turned it down, I mean, I knew some of them, they go crazy with the list of people, and it's hard to nail it all down. But let me read off the Sergio. He wanted originally Henry Fonda, and of course he finally gets Henry Fonda for Once Upon a Time in the West. He wore him down, and the first three movies are making so much money.
Yeah, so there was a series that Henry Fonda did that were westerns,
Yeah.
and he was very successful in those, so I can see why they won.
Right. Well, and when you see Once Upon a Time in the West, you understand it's a really interesting, it's a really ironic twist of what we think of Henry Fonda and what he's playing in Once Upon a Time in the
Well,
West.
yeah, he plays the personification of pure evil. He's a demon. He might as well just wear his wings.
He's Abraham Lincoln. He's White Earp, you know.
He's the judge from Blood Meridian.
Yeah. And then
More
there's
close, but otherwise.
And then there's Charles Bronson, who he eventually gets for Once Upon a Time. Yeah. Oh yeah. My Name Is Nobody, and that's the Henry Fonda one you're thinking of.
Right.
Bronson turned it down, and then we got Henry Silva, Roy Calhoun, Tony Russell, whoever that is. You know Tony Russell?
Yeah. Tony Russell, he's an American actor. He was very well known in Italy for being in a couple of, well, more than a few movies, but he also was one of the main English dubbers for films coming out of Italy and going to English-speaking territories.
So he was in a lot of films he didn't act in.
Yes, exactly.
And this is Rodney Bardette. He's got a couple podcasts. If you have any questions about Paul Naschy, see him this weekend. And he can give you the whole story on Paul Naschy. Steve Reeves off the Hercules series, Ty Hardin, and James Coburn. And of course, Coburn would eventually do one with Ducky Sucker. So anyway, again, and United Artists kind of wanted to play it a little bit like a James Bond franchise in the marketing, and they have a known name, and the Bond films were doing gangbusters, so that was the whole deal with that. Like I said, we didn't see it until '67, but it started making waves in '64. That said, I'm going to take a break. John, introduce yourself and tell us about your experience in '64 or '64 films.
Well, thank you so much. Again, I want to offer my apologies for being late. We left in plenty of time from Charlotte, but it was not plenty enough time to get here. We got caught in a couple traffic snarls. But anyway, my name is John Muir. I write under the name John Kenneth Muir. I write mostly about horror and science fiction. created an audio drama called Enter the House Between, with the star of it right there, back there, Alicia Martin, and a new web series called Abnormal Fixation. I don't know what you talked about, so I certainly don't want to waste your time having been late with questions.
You may bring something perspective.
Different, did you talk about Goldfinger?
Well, we did talk about Mom, but there's more we can talk about.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
So, or another film that I really love that I think is very timely today from 1964. Does anybody know the film 7 Days in May?
Oh,
About,
and Surly.
yes, right. It's about the discovery. I mean, it's very timely. The last several years about an attempted right-wing coup of the United States government. Who mentioned Serling? Right? Yes, right.
Yeah.
Rod Serling wrote it, right? So it's got that.
And of course, the follow-on to the Manchurian Candidate by John Frankenheimer.
Right. So again, a very powerful black and white film that year that sort of captured a political moment. And as time in history is cyclical, we're kind of back in that phase where people are talking about coups and things like that, and who's going to take and political violence and taking over the United States and things of that nature. So it's fascinating. The film 60 years ago is so relevant today. And if you look at it, it's like there's a picture of the Constitution that starts the film and things like that. So does anybody remember that film?
Yeah.
No, from 64? Okay, it's a...
Very bad, very charismatic Burt Lancaster,
Burt.
very good Kirk Douglas, and a very old Frederick March.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of the films that Kirk and Burt did together. There's a kind of a list of quasi them teaming up, together, big buddies.
What's so interesting about the film, even though I said it's a right-wing coup, the character who sort of stops at the general is also sort of right-wing. He doesn't agree with the sort of leftist president who is in danger of losing the office. And it showed you, it's like where people draw the line with responsibility. It's like, and the overall takeaway from this is like, I might disagree with who's in office. I may hate them. I don't like anything about them, but they were duly elected. And so it's my job as somebody in the military to make sure that they stay in office because that's who the people chose, right? So there's one person who says that, and then there's the general who's like, no, we hate this guy, he's out, and we take over. So it was the difference between duty to the ideal or dream of what America is, which is that we might not always agree, but we have a responsibility to democracy, and the other person says, no, we hate this guy, we're going to take over the country. So, I mean, fascinating film that has lost none of its relevance, has arguably become more relevant since 1964.
And can you imagine that Richard, you might saw, will you see movies in 64?
I was not born until 69.
Oh, okay.
So no, but
Sorry, some of us are old friends.
Right.
Richard and Bob here were seeing stuff at a good age in 64.
Well, back then, film was made out of something different, rocks. And
Crush rock.
Can you imagine
on tablets, right?
if you were an active moviegoer, so you see that, and you see Dr. Strangelove,
Right.
and Failsafe too. You can imagine what was that like, Richard, seeing those things like that, and Bob, what was your reaction to seeing stuff like that? Strangelove. Did you see Strangelove on its first run?
No.
Oh, okay. Did you, Richard?
I did.
And was it?
Dad took me to that. So, and I didn't get any of the humor. I didn't get any.
You took it seriously. You took it straight on.
Yeah, that's how I was.
Wow, that's
because
cool.
those were the kind of movies that
You really thought the generals were like that, huh?
my father liked war movies and things that involved
Did your dad hate the film?
deep thinking, and so I assumed that's what we were going to see. But I was telling Bob the other day that when I went to see, it was one of the black and white war movies. That might have been Battle of the Bulge, if that was in black and
That
white.
was in color.
That was color.
Okay, sorry.
Well, there was I don't know.
But I thought they
Well, I
were.
mean, figured out, there were only 3 or 4 black and white war movies, right?
Yeah. But I thought they were episodes of combat. Just on the big screen.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I played combat in the neighborhood with kids, and I always wanted to be the sergeant. And it was between combat and Sergeant Fury comics.
Yeah.
I had to be a sergeant in
I played combat on Atari 2600.
No, I'm old school live
You can see
action.
the deterioration over time.
Yes. So did your dad go, this is crazy because the journal was crazy. Was he mad about it or did I?
No, he actually felt that it was an important film.
Wow, that's
He
cool.
truly felt that it was.
'Cause I can see some people reacting badly to it, you know, like, well, how dare they do this and show this kind of silliness, you know?
No, he thought it was a big deal.
Uh,
And he was right.
Joan?
They had a plausible idea about how someone could take over our nuclear arsenal.
Right.
And to think about the 64, you got Peter Sellers, you got Shot in the Dark, Pink Panther, and Strangelove. 64 was Peter's year. I mean, and I think we basically, he did a lot of crud, or, you know, interesting but mediocre films or whatever, but when the genius and the artistry of Peter Sellers is known, that is shown in the year 64, and I think we kind of, that's my image of him in my mind, and then of course you get the huge, amazing latter day film being there, but it's, you know, that consolidated Peter as being one of the great comedy. In fact, I think the Billy Wilder film, was that the 64? With Dean Martin?
Kiss
you
Me
know,
Stupid?
Kiss Me Stupid,
Yeah.
is that 64? Because Peter was supposed to be in that, and he had a heart attack, and they didn't, and he couldn't be in it, so that would have been a Billy Wilder film under his belt too.
65, but I may be wrong.
John, another, you know, some days amazing director, can you tell, Ian, do you have any thoughts about John Frankenheimer? Because he had The Train out in 64 also.
Oh, gosh. So, well, you mentioned Manchurian Candidate, right? Again, another terrifying sort of prescient film about politics in our country and the accusation. I mean, what is a Manchurian candidate, right? A candidate representing a foreign interest, you know, almost getting into the Oval Office, right? The idea of somebody being a stalking horse for an agenda outside democracy and the United States. Again, incredibly powerful film, black and white. You know, that film also played on the past. I don't remember, James Gregory played the actual Manchurian candidate, the actual person who wanted to be president. He would say, you know, there are this many communists in the United States government. Does anybody remember seeing that film and how he picked the number of communists in the United States government?
It's 57.
It's 57. Why was it 57, Rodney? You know?
The ketchup.
The ketchup, right? He didn't remember what number he said. He looked at the ketchup and he said there's 57 communists in the
Yeah, because he was about to be called out for having used different numbers.
numbers. Right. So this idea of somebody lying, not being consistent. Now, obviously, we hark back to the McCarthy hearings and that. But I mean, again, we haven't lost track of this idea. People calling people. People othering candidates, saying, well, they're not from here, they're not legitimate, right? I mean, we've had that happen again and again with birth certificates, or saying because of somebody's gender or race that they can't be president, right?
So, be frank,
Are any of y'all familiar with the film from just a couple of years before that? It was a black and white film written by Gore Vidal with Henry Fonda and...
The Man?
Huh?
The Man? Or, no, go ahead.
No, it takes place at a political convention where they're still, back at the time when we still figured out who was going to be the presidential candidate at
That's the
conventions.
convention.
And
I think it's called The Man, isn't it? Or is there might be mixing it?
the Best Man.
Best Man.
Best Man.
Yeah.
And a brilliant film, and it lays out the reason why one candidate, essentially Henry Fonda's character, has a piece of information on his rival to get the nomination, and he won't use it because he's moral.
And
What
Fonda-
it is that his, and this is in 1960, remember, his opponent has hidden his homosexuality.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it becomes evident over the course of the film that the whole point of this almost real-time story is him figuring out whether or not he can smother his disgust at doing that to someone to have power. And I think it's the best example of a film that leads directly to these films that you're talking about,
Right.
where we're closely examining what it takes in an individual, in the government, in a democracy, to not take advantage of something that will paint someone in a horrible way in the public's mind to get what they want. It's to seize power in a way that is immoral, wrong, whatever. And if you ever get the chance, it's hard to see these days.
Yeah.
The Best Man is not a very released film.
Yeah, I've never seen it, to be totally honest. It
It's
sounds
not,
fascinating.
I thought it was shown on, I swear to you, it was shown on like Cinemax in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
That's how I caught it. But it's just absolutely brilliant film. It's one of those things that leads to things like 7 Days of May and Manchurian Candidate and all these kinds of things. It pushes that idea forward in.
And Kennedy had been assassinated, of course, we're living into that in the 60s.
Right. And so it's, after the Kennedy assassination, a lot of things became a bit more viable on screen. The cruelty, the willingness to actually put forth the worst possible road being taken is.
And so, in Frankenheimer, the 7 Days of May, and The Train, which was a Burt Lancaster film, he took over. I think Arthur Penn was actually the original director of that or something. And Frankenheimer took over, and that's the Nazis in World War II film, black and white. The Nazis are leave, exiting cities, but they're taking all the paintings and treasures with them, and it's all on a train. So the French resistance and American soldiers and stuff are wanting to get that. So Frankenheimer had 2 hits in '64, and he came from television. He was one of these TV generation directors that did a lot of live TV in the 50s and became 64. This era is 7 Days of May, Manchurian Candidate, The Train. He's in a really big role right now, this period. So he's one of the major directors. In fact, I was reading Quentin Tarantino's book that he put out, his essays and films, and he came up with a term for this group of directors that precede the Scorsese, the Coppola era. It's like Frankenheimer and Arthur Penn and a few, and he had a name for them. And they were all very progressive and they're really, really interesting films, and they're all early 60s, and they're starting to, some are starting to really peter out when Scorsese and De Palma and Coppola and all those guys come along. And so Frankenheimer's important. I think we should mention Barney as Hitchcock. Where do you stand on, Elaine, have you seen Barney?
I believe so. I know I've seen a lot of Alfred Hitchcock, but I can't remember if I've seen that one.
It's like I said, some people say it's the last really good one on a roll he was on. Some say no, it's the beginning of the mediocre ones.
It's the Sean Connery film that Sean wasn't James Bond.
Right, but that's the interesting thing. This is that period where Sean is at his apex of his looks, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think he's totally got all the hair loss yet.
Oh no, it was gorgeous.
And he's in great shape in Goldfinger. He starts getting a little pudgy by only the twice, but he's in top shape mode. And Hitchcock grabs him because Hitchcock knows he's box office and does Barney, and then of course the whole Tippy Hedren thing.
Yeah.
You guys have the backstory of Tippy. What do you guys think, John and Richard, about Barney?
Be kind, use the word flawed.
Actually, I really like Marnie. I don't think that it's top tier Hitchcock. I mean, if you talk to like Rear Window, Vertigo, Psycho, but I mean that is such a high level, so that's really no dig against the film, right?
I mean, it's still a really interesting film.
Right.
If you go into it thinking, man, I love Rear Window, boy, are you going to be disappointed.
Yeah,
Right.
And get this, it was number 18 of overall box office that year. It was the
Well, that star power that had Hitchcock's name attached to it.
Nowadays, film dies and they make the pronouncement, oh, it's dead the first weekend.
Yeah.
But it's still, back then they would let it go for a while.
They had second, third, and fourth runs.
Yeah, and it didn't come in drive-ins, and it didn't live by that first weekend. And Hitchcock and Connery kept it alive, even though most people said, it's okay, whatever they said, Richard, have you ever seen it?
When I saw it, but not in the theater.
TV?
But it's one of those movies where it's got James Bond in it, and it follows, not directly, but it follows Psycho. It's going to be great, and then it's not that movie.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it wasn't great, it wasn't good. It's just not that movie that everybody figures, okay, here we go.
Yeah, and intentionally so. I mean, the story they're telling is not what most audiences were going to be expecting.
Right.
I mean, it's very psychological, view of a woman kind of losing her mind because the relationship she in is so, it is so terrible in so many different ways, she doesn't know how to deal with it, but that's not what most people are signed up for when they see the word Hitchcock, or
Right.
Sean Connery, or, you know.
Yeah,
Right, well, 'cause
the big
Hitchcock-
reveal wasn't that exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he had just done The Birds the previous year, right?
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, today we look at it and say, oh, you know, we know how it was done, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, the special effects for the time
Yeah,
are
horrifying.
astonishing.
Yeah, it was
And The
terrible.
Birds, I mean, I still love it. I still think it's a terrifying movie.
It's a great movie.
Even though you know, today you recognize sort of all the process work and all that. But I mean, at the time, that was, you know, this kind of stellar, terrifying film. And you think, oh, you know, really, okay, so maybe it's not as good as Psycho, but if you were a fan of Psycho and then in '63 he does The Birds, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, he's upping his game every time, you know, and then you get this
And then
fairly,
you get to Marnie, yeah,
and then you get a subdued
it's a chamber
film.
piece, it's a really small story.
Right,
It's-
right,
And
yeah.
you take the biggest actor on the planet that year and you make him do something unbelievably horrible.
Yeah, you essentially turn him into a marital rapist.
Yeah, and my first exposure to it was on television, probably on its first evening it showed on television. And I'm way too young for it. I remember thinking that sequence you're talking about there, no doubt about it, you can't skirt around it, it's a rape sequence. And I remember watching that, and it was, you know, on television, it's intact somewhat because of the way it was shot. And I remember as a little kid going, oh, she's standing there with no clothes on, what's going on? And I remember thinking, that's the kind of thing, I think these, again, seeing these films when I was very young, and my dad let me see these, that's why I'm cinema crazy now, because I was seeing these things that I had to start thinking about it, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm wondering, as opposed to seeing the, you know, Credible Mr. Flippin for the fourth time or something like that. You know, so, in fact, I think I had to catch up to Mary Poppins, I think, when I was a kid. I didn't see it on its first run, I don't think. And then My Fair Lady was number 2, just for the record. There's an interesting one, I don't know if you mentioned it on your list. The Last Man on Earth was released in '64 with Vincent Price.
Did it get released in the States in '64?
That's, according to this, it's an American release of releases.
Yeah.
Okay. It could be, maybe it's a '63 film or it's
No, it was 64 in Italy.
It was 64 in Italy, I just didn't know if it made it here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, this is internet, so you know, you can.
That one was actually a U.S.-Italian co-production in any case. so-
And everybody knows that we saw it, and then there's remakes of the Omega Man with Charlton Heston and then the Will Smith.
I Am Legend.
I Am Legend. But, and I just got around to finally watching this one with Vincent Price, and not this year, I think I saw it for the first time finally. And I thought, well, it's not bad. It's got some interesting things going, and the look of it's pretty cool, you know? I mean,
It's a slow burn.
yeah. If you go into it, you know, not expecting whistles and bells and, you know, razzle dazzle, it's like, no, this is pretty
And it's a,
cool.
it's a good in the dark movie too, because you've got the organ come out, you know, that kind of thing. It's just, it's just a scary sound to it. And
It looks and moves like an Italian neo-realist film, like
Yeah,
bicycle
yes,
thieves of the time. And, you know, Vincent Price, we love, but we associate him with the sort of big characterizations, Abominable Dr. Faust, things like that. He's not like that at all. He's not theatrical, over the top. I mean, he is giving this authentic, from inside himself, performance of agony and trauma, being the last person, you know, alive. So, I mean, I love that film. It doesn't look like other horror movies of that period, so it looks like the neo-realist films. And Price is not how we normally associate him. Not that there's anything wrong with the way we normally associate him, but it's much more internally driven performance, much more buttoned down, real, what we would today say is a realistic performance, right?
It's about as close as Price ever got to being a proper everyman.
Right, exactly, because you wouldn't cast him thinking of him as an everyman, because he is, I mean, he's huge, his presence is big, right? But in this, he's so human, you know, and he breaks down weeping at one point in the film, and it's completely convincing. So I really love that film. I think it's a great film.
so do I.
According to our timekeeper, we're out of time.
I mean, no rush.
No rush, because we got the next one, half hour for the next one.
Well,
So
nothing's happening for an hour after this.
Let's go 5:30, I think. He said half hour, I think.
Well, I'm just saying is that nothing's happening. I'm just saying, look at the schedule here.
What time is the next panel here?
6:30.
6:30.
Yeah, you're right. So it's a half.
Okay, 6:30.
So no rush.
Let me just rattle these off before we all, Art, I also have a trivia question to throw out. Actually, let's do that now. I got a random prize for a random question. First one to answer. Let me, give it, Richard, you can give it to him.
No, just kidding, I was speaking your.
Okay, here's one, a 1964 release. Who is the main star? It's a Disney film. Who is the main star in The Three Lives of Thomasina? Well, that's a really, I guess I got a tough one. I was gonna make it, I thought it was gonna be easy.
I don't figure I get to answer this.
I good one. I
Hey,
mean,
I just finally watched The Absent-Minded Professor, for God's sake, this past week, so come on.
I'll give a hint. Go ahead.
Patrick McGowan.
You're the winner, sir.
Sorry, folks.
Do you have that? You have a copy of that? You know about it?
Yeah, no, I probably ought to get a copy.
Okay. There you go.
I mean, I'm writing a book on Czech cinema and it uses a
There you
Czech
go.
screenplay.
So- So the wrap up, we go through here, and you guys chime in, and Wayne, you know, you didn't give much. How about Raiders from Beneath the Sea? You know that one, Richard?
No, which was it?
Raiders from Beneath the Sea.
Oh, wait.
Ken Scott and Mary Anders.
Yeah, I thought for some reason it was a release of one of those serials because it sounds very serial. You know, it sounds like it's got 15 chapters, so.
Sounds like it's got something.
I'm not going to mention the ones we already mentioned, but hey, we can't leave out Santa Claus Conjures the Martians. So, you know.
Tia Isadora in her premiere film.
Yes.
And like I said, The Three Lives of Thomasina is a Disney film. They were doing a bunch of films in England because they were getting a money break by doing these films, like The Scarecrow with Patrick McGowan. Patrick McGowan did this family film with a cat and a girl and his daughter, and it's called Three Lives of Thomasina. I'm a big Patrick McGowan fan. Prison's my favorite TV series.
Never heard.
Again, Peter Sellers again. I should leave out The World of Henry Orient. And George Roy Hill starting to warm up as a great director. So Sellers is really cooking in '64.
Evil of
anybody else have any-
Frankenstein.
Huh?
Evil of Frankenstein.
Oh, there you go. Any last wrap? Anybody else have any last observations or?
10,000 Maniacs.
Was that 64?
Yeah.
And the U.S. release of Black Sabbath, which is very different from the '63 Italian.
Yeah. So yeah, the foreign releases and how they got over here. Like I said, a lot of the lists earlier I listed a bunch of. There were like 2 $4 and Tonyoni, you know, but they probably didn't get here to another year or so. Who knows when they got here? But they were officially done in their countries in '64. So they were great years. Dryer was still good, you know, or Dryer. Yeah. I should mention another franchise. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. Is the AIP Beach movies? There were 3 of them in '64. So
And squishing together, there's one movie.
And all of them had people like Karloff.
yes,
Bone.
the cameos and all that stuff. They cross promoted. It was
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
I love that stuff.
They were all AIP contract plans.
Did you see Bob? Did you guys see the beach movies at the theaters?
I saw Horror Party Beach.
No, that one. But did you see the Frankie and that one? You didn't. That was just like that. So.
I saw those.
Did you?
Not '64, but I've seen those.
You like them?
Frankie and that movies, yeah.
Okay.
They used to play them in some, like summertime.
And they get you films.
Yeah, I liked all that.
Richard, did you see
Yeah, I saw,
Bikini Beach and Muscle Beach?
it was,
Jungle Party.
I think it was Bikini Beach, that's the one I saw, because Karloff was in it.
Yeah.
I believe that was the one that he was in.
I was listening
Oh,
to
the
it
Ghost in the Invisible
Yes, yeah.
Bikini, but that's not.
a little bit later. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast. You must remember this. I really recommend it. Katrina Longworth, she did one on Boris and Bella, and Boris is just working his butt off over this time period. He's falling apart health-wise, but he still just keeps on plugging up to like a month before he died or something. He had done some film work for a Mexican studio, but shooting it in California, and then he was in the hospital for 1 week or
Yeah,
something.
those were the Mexican four.
Yeah, Mexican war.
Yeah.
So,
And Bella, unfortunately,
right.
Bela didn't survive.
His resurrection.
Yeah. Well, I think I was 3 months old when it
Oh,
happened.
really? Yeah. So Famous Monsters of Filmland, you can't, again, '64, it's still a big tome of important magazine, but the Monster Kids were just going crazy over. So I knew this was like a hopeless battle to get everything in, and no, that's the but we we could do another 2 hours, I think, easily, talking about these films and going into them deeper, but again, you know, you got the Bond, you got Goldfinger, you got Hard Day's Night, you got Fistful of Dollars over in Italy playing, it's a great year, so I don't know how you guys watch films, you go, but a lot of times it's kind of cool to put it in context and see what else is put into time, so there you go. And John's got a table in the vendor's room, so be sure to check out his table.
Come see me, please.
Can I offer the, can I offer the team the re-roll on the swag?
Oh, yeah.
All right, you, of course, one of the reasons why the Fistful of Dollars was held up in the U.S. was because, of course, it was an unacknowledged remake of Yojimbo. What movie or what book was Yojimbo an unacknowledged adaptation of?
Should I say it out loud or just? It's Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest.
There you go.
Oh, well, thank you. And how many adaptations, how many unacknowledged adaptations of that story have been made since then? No man knows.
Most of them.
There've been like at least 5 or 6 I can name.
The question is either that or the Glass Key as a percentage.
Yeah.